Have you ever been in a relationship where every time you tried to express your feelings, you were told you were overreacting, or that you were being too sensitive? It's subtle, isn't it? You start to question yourself. You start to believe maybe you're the one with the problem. Meet Maya. She was in love with Alex. In the beginning, everything felt perfect. They laughed, shared dreams, and created beautiful memories together. But slowly, something changed. Every time Maya tried to talk about her feelings, about something Alex did that hurt her, he would dismiss her with a casual, "You're being too dramatic," or, "Come on, it's not that serious." At first, she brushed it off, convincing herself that maybe she was overthinking things. But over time, those words began to stick. Maya found herself questioning her own emotions, wondering if she was indeed making too much of small things. She stopped voicing her concerns, started bottling everything up. She didn't want to be the sensitive one, or the one who was always making a big deal out of nothing. She felt small, unseen, unheard. Does this sound familiar? This tactic, where someone minimizes your emotions or the hurt they've caused, is called minimization. It's a subtle but powerful form of manipulation, one that erodes your sense of self-worth. Over time, it can make you feel like your feelings don't matter, like you don't matter. In this video, we're going to explore the damaging effects of minimization, how to recognize it, and most importantly, how to reclaim your voice and self-worth. You deserve to feel seen, heard, and respected. Stay with us as we dive deep into the ways minimization can silently erode your confidence and how you can take back control. The silent impact of minimization. As Maya continued to silence herself, the weight of her unspoken emotions grew heavier. Every time Alex brushed off her feelings, a piece of her self-confidence chipped away. She found herself avoiding important conversations, fearing that she'd be dismissed or made to feel small again. Maybe I'm just too emotional, she thought. Maybe I should just let it go. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. The thing about minimization is that it doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in slowly, little by little, until you start to doubt your own reality. One moment you're standing up for yourself, and the next you're questioning whether your feelings are even valid. Minimization makes you believe that your pain, your concerns, your needs are too small to matter. And that's exactly what happened to Maya. She started feeling isolated, trapped in her own mind. The world around her didn't see what was going on because Alex wasn't outwardly cruel. He wasn't yelling or calling her names. He was just dismissing her. Every time he told her, "You're overreacting," or "It's not that big of a deal," he made her question herself a little more. Have you ever felt that way? Like your emotions were too much, too inconvenient? Like maybe you should just keep quiet because no one wants to hear about it anyway? That's how minimization works. It's quiet, but it's powerful. It leaves you feeling invisible, even when you're right in front of the person you care about. But here's the truth. Your feelings are valid. They deserve to be heard. And minimizing them doesn't make them go away. It just makes the pain grow deeper inside. In the next few minutes, we're going to explore how this seemingly innocent tactic can lead to long-term emotional damage, and how recognizing it is the first step toward reclaiming your voice and your worth. The subtle pain of gaslighting. As Maya navigated through her relationship, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time she brought up a concern, Alex would twist the narrative. "That's not what happened," he'd say, his voice calm, almost too calm. "You're remembering it wrong." At first, she would push back. "No, I'm sure that's how it went," she'd insist. But over time, she found herself second-guessing everything. Every conversation, every memory, started to feel hazy, like a dream she couldn't quite hold on to. Gaslighting doesn't just make you question the other person. It makes you question yourself. It seeps into your mind, turning your own reality against you. For Maya, it was like living in a fog. Moments she was sure of suddenly felt distorted. The more Alex insisted she was wrong, the more she started to believe it. "Maybe I am too sensitive," she thought. "Maybe I am exaggerating." And that's the danger of gaslighting. It makes you feel like you can't trust your own mind. It's not loud or obvious, but it's devastating. It's the kind of manipulation that works silently, chipping away at your confidence, your sense of truth, until you're left with nothing but doubt. Maya found herself walking on eggshells, not just with Alex, but with herself. She became afraid to bring things up, afraid to trust her instincts. What if I'm wrong again, she'd think. And that fear, that constant uncertainty, made her feel smaller and smaller in her own life. But here's something Maya didn't realize at the time. Gaslighting is about control, not truth. It's designed to make you doubt your own experiences so that you become more reliant on the manipulator's version of reality. And it's one of the most powerful tools in a manipulator's arsenal because it makes you complicit in your own self-doubt. Have you ever felt like your memories were slipping away? Like someone was rewriting your story in front of you and you couldn't stop it? That's gaslighting. And recognizing it is the first step toward reclaiming your sense of reality. You deserve to trust your mind. You deserve to believe in your own truth. The weight of emotional blackmail. As Maya continued in her relationship with Alex, something more insidious began to unfold. Emotional blackmail. It wasn't the kind of blackmail you might see in movies, with threats or ultimatums. No, this was subtler. It was the constant tug of guilt and obligation, the invisible strings that pulled tighter every time Maya tried to stand her ground. "If you really loved me, you'd do this," Alex would say. His voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed, soft, pleading, as if he was the one being wronged. And every time, Maya would feel that familiar sinking sensation in her chest. Was she being selfish? Was she wrong to want something for herself? The guilt would wash over her, so heavy that it became almost unbearable to say no. It wasn't just about getting her to agree. It was about controlling her, making her feel that her needs were less important, that her desires were secondary to his. "You don't care about me," he'd accuse, and each word felt like a knife. How could she argue with that? How could she defend herself without feeling like she was proving his point? Every disagreement became a moral test, and somehow, Maya always ended up feeling like she failed. The worst part was how isolating it felt. Alex made her believe that her boundaries were the problem. "You're so sensitive," he'd say, or, "Why are you always making things difficult?" And every time, Maya would retreat further into herself, afraid that standing up for her own needs meant she was hurting him. She felt trapped in a cycle of pleasing him, giving in, losing herself bit by bit. But that's the power of emotional blackmail. It disguises control as love. It makes you feel like you're protecting the relationship, when really, you're just losing yourself. The guilt, the shame, the constant second-guessing, it's all designed to keep you in line, to make you feel like you're always one step away from disappointing the person who claims to love you. Have you ever felt like you're carrying the weight of someone else's happiness on your shoulders? Like every decision, every boundary you try to set comes with a heavy dose of guilt? That's emotional blackmail, and it's not love. Real love doesn't manipulate through guilt. Real love doesn't ask you to sacrifice yourself for someone else's comfort. Maya didn't know it then, but the guilt wasn't hers to carry, and neither is yours. You deserve to have your needs respected. You deserve to say no without feeling like the villain. The pain of projection. As Maya struggled under the weight of emotional blackmail, another insidious form of manipulation emerged: projection. At first, it seemed like a simple misunderstanding. Alex would accuse her of things she had never done, things she couldn't even imagine herself doing. "You're flirting with other people," he'd say. "I see how you look at them." These accusations came out of nowhere, and at first, Maya felt confused. She wasn't flirting, and she knew it, but Alex spoke with such certainty, with such conviction, that it made her question herself. Could she be sending signals she wasn't even aware of? Was she somehow doing something wrong without realizing it? She started to become hyper-aware of her every move, overthinking every interaction she had with others, afraid that Alex might be right. But here's the heartbreaking truth about projection. The very things Alex accused Maya of doing were the things he was guilty of himself. While he pointed fingers at her, Alex was hiding his own behavior behind a wall of accusations. He was the one flirting, the one crossing boundaries, and instead of taking responsibility, he turned his guilt into a weapon against Maya. Every time he accused her, it was as if he was deflecting the truth away from himself, pushing the spotlight onto her so he could stay in the shadows. and Maya, already worn down by emotional blackmail, felt powerless to argue. How could she defend herself when she didn't even know the real reason behind the accusations? She spent her days walking on eggshells, trying to avoid anything that might trigger Alex's jealousy, but it never seemed to be enough. Projection is a cruel form of manipulation because it distorts reality. It takes the flaws and insecurities of the manipulator and plants them in your mind, making you doubt yourself, your actions, and your integrity. Maya began to feel like she was constantly defending herself, constantly justifying her every move, even when she had done nothing wrong. It was exhausting mentally and emotionally. She started to feel like she was losing herself in the chaos of Alex's accusations. But then, one day, the pieces started to fall into place. Maya noticed inconsistencies in Alex's behavior, little things that didn't add up. The accusations became more frantic, more desperate, and suddenly, Maya realized it wasn't about her at all. Alex was projecting his own guilt onto her, making her carry the weight of his wrongdoings. The relief and heartbreak hit her all at once. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't the one to blame. Have you ever been accused of something that you know in your heart isn't true, but the accusation is so strong, so relentless, that you start to believe it? That's projection, and it's one of the most damaging forms of manipulation. It's not about you, it's about them. And the moment you realize that, the power of projection begins to crumble. Maya's realization was a turning point. She could see through the fog of accusations, through the lies and deflections, and with that clarity, she began to reclaim her sense of self, the breaking point. After weeks of constant accusations and manipulations, Maya was exhausted. She felt like she was drowning in Alex's projections and control. But even as she teetered on the edge, there was still a part of her that believed things could get better. Maybe if she tried harder, maybe if she just found the right words, things would change. One evening, they were sitting on the couch in silence. The TV was on, but Maya wasn't paying attention to the screen. She was lost in her own thoughts, trying to figure out what more she could do to fix things. Suddenly, Alex turned to her and said, "You've been distant lately. I know you don't care about us anymore." His voice was sharp, laced with accusation, but beneath it, there was something more, something Maya hadn't noticed before. Fear. Desperation. It struck her then. Alex's manipulations weren't just about control. They were coming from a place of deep insecurity, a fear of losing her, a fear of not being enough. But instead of communicating his vulnerability, he wrapped it in anger and blame, making Maya the villain in their story. For the first time in a long while, Maya didn't immediately defend herself. She didn't scramble to prove her love or loyalty. She just sat there, staring at Alex, feeling an overwhelming sadness. "I do care," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "but I can't keep doing this. I can't keep living like this." There was a pause, heavy and thick between them. Alex opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. In that moment, Maya realized that all the fights, all the accusations, all the projections were never about fixing their relationship. They were about control, about keeping her trapped in a cycle of guilt and fear. And now, as she sat there, something inside her snapped. The breaking point wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't come in the form of a shouting match or a dramatic exit. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, like a thread finally giving way after being pulled too tight for too long. Maya felt something shift inside her, an understanding that no matter how hard she tried, she could never make Alex feel secure. That was something he had defined within himself. Her heart ached for the boy she had once loved, the one who had made her laugh and feel safe. But that person was gone, replaced by someone who used manipulation and blame as shields to protect his fragile ego. And Maya knew, with a deep sense of finality, that she couldn't save him. She could only save herself. Have you ever had a moment where you realize that no matter how much you love someone, you can't fix them? That no amount of patience or kindness can heal their wounds if they are willing to face them? It's a devastating realization, but it's also freeing. Because in that moment, Maya understood that her responsibility wasn't to fix Alex. It was to protect herself, to save her own spirit from being crushed under the weight of his insecurities. As the silence stretched on, Maya stood up. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Alex watched her, his eyes wide with confusion. but he didn't say a word. He must have sensed it too, that something had irrevocably changed between them. Without looking back, Maya walked out of the room, leaving behind the heavy burden she had been carrying for far too long, the quiet aftermath. Maya closed the door to the bedroom, her breath trembling as she leaned against it. The weight of the past weeks, months, even years settled heavily on her chest. Her heart raced, not from fear or anxiety, but from the sudden release of tension that had bound her for so long. She was free, or at least she was beginning to be. But the freedom felt fragile, like the quiet after a storm. In that silence, she was left alone with the echoes of everything that had just transpired. She sat down on the edge of the bed, staring out the window. The city lights blinked in the distance, indifferent to the turmoil unfolding inside her. The world outside moved on, unaware of the battle she had just fought and won within herself. And that was the strangest part, how something so monumental could go unnoticed, how the most profound moments in life often happen in complete isolation. Tears pricked her eyes, but they weren't the kind of tears that come from sadness or regret. They were the kind that flowed from a deep well of relief, from the exhaustion of holding on to something for too long. She had given so much of herself to Alex, to the idea of their relationship, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be her own person. Now, as the walls around her heart began to crumble, Maya felt that forgotten part of herself stirring, reaching for the surface. She remembered the girl she used to be, before the doubts, before the accusations. The girl who laughed without fear of judgment, who danced in the kitchen while making breakfast, who spoke her mind without second-guessing herself. That girl had been quiet for too long, buried beneath layers of guilt and confusion. But now, in this fragile moment of clarity, Maya could feel her coming back to life. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, snapping her out of her thoughts. She hesitated before picking it up, half expecting it to be Alex. But it wasn't. It was a message from her best friend Lily. "Are you okay? I've been thinking about you a lot lately. Miss you." A soft smile tugged at the corners of Maya's lips. She hadn't realized how much she had distanced herself from her friends, from the people who had always been there for her. In trying to save her relationship, she had let other parts of her life fall away. But Lily's message was a reminder that she wasn't alone, that there were still people who cared about her, who wanted to see her happy. Maya typed a quick response. "I miss you too. Can we talk soon?" It felt like such a small step, but in reality, it was a giant leap toward reclaiming her life. She wasn't just reaching out to her friend, she was reaching out to herself, to the parts of her that had been silenced for far too long. In the quiet of the bedroom, with the city lights flickering outside, Maya felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't consumed by thoughts of Alex or their relationship. She wasn't trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. Instead, she was focused on herself, on healing, on finding her way back to the person she used to be and the person she wanted to become. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments where the loneliness would creep in, where the temptation to return to the familiar would feel overwhelming. But Maya knew, deep in her heart, that this was the only way forward. She couldn't go back to the way things were, not after everything she had realized. She had crossed a threshold and there was no turning back. And in that stillness, in the space between the past and whatever the future held, Maya took a deep breath. She didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She felt free. Rebuilding bridges. As the night deepened, Maya lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. The silence in the room wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm, almost comforting. She hadn't felt this way in so long. The turmoil that had once swirled inside her seemed to settle, leaving behind a soft hum of clarity. But with that clarity came a new thought. How much she had let slip away, how many people she had distanced herself from in the midst of her struggle with Alex. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Lily, it was her brother, Josh. The message was brief, just a question. "Hey, you good?" But beneath those 3 words, Maya could feel the concern, the patience of someone who had been waiting, quietly hoping she'd reach out. She couldn't help but remember the last time they had spoken. It had been months ago, right after a particularly bad argument with Alex. She had been upset, venting, pouring out every frustration she had. Josh had listened, as he always did, but he'd said something that cut deeper than she wanted to admit. "Maya, you deserve more than this. You don't have to stay." At the time, it felt like a betrayal, like he didn't understand how hard she was trying to fix things. She hadn't spoken to him much since then, unwilling to confront the truth in his words. But now, as she read his message, she felt a wave of gratitude. He had been right all along, and even after the distance she had created, he was still there, waiting patiently on the other side. Maya typed back slowly, thoughtfully. "I'm getting there. Can we talk soon? I miss you." The vulnerability of those words made her heart race, but she knew this was part of the process. Rebuilding the bridges she had let fall into disrepair was going to take time, but it was necessary. She couldn't go through this journey alone, not anymore. As she sent the message, Maya thought about all the relationships she had let go of, the people who had once been such an integral part of her life. It wasn't just about reconnecting with them. It was about reconnecting with herself. The person she had been before Alex, the Maya who was bold, independent, and filled with light, had been slowly eclipsed, but she was still there, waiting to be rediscovered. Her thoughts drifted to the conversations she used to have with Josh, the way he always knew how to make her laugh, even when things were hard. There had been so much love in her life, so many people who had tried to remind her of her worth, and she had pushed them away, consumed by the toxic pull of a relationship that wasn't healthy. But now she was ready to let those people back in, to apologize, to be honest, and to rebuild those connections with the people who had always had her back. Her phone lit up again. This time, it was a response from Josh. "Anytime. I'm here." Those 3 words felt like a lifeline, reminding her that no matter how far she had drifted, there was still time to come back. Still space in her life for the relationships that truly mattered. With a deep breath, Maya set the phone down beside her, feeling the weight of the past lift just a little more. She wasn't just letting go of Alex. She was letting go of the guilt, the shame, the fear that had kept her isolated. And in their place, she was allowing something new to grow. Hope, connection, and the slow but steady process of healing. She knew it wouldn't happen overnight. There would be hard conversations, moments of doubt, and times when she'd be tempted to retreat into the safety of solitude. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone in this. She had people who loved her, people who were ready to help her pick up the pieces. And, perhaps most importantly, she had herself. As the night stretched on, Maya allowed herself to drift into sleep, her heart a little lighter, her mind a little clearer. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready to face it, one step at a time, confronting the ghosts. The morning light crept through the curtains, casting a soft, golden glow across Maya's room. It was a new day, but as she sat on the edge of her bed, her mind swirled with thoughts of the past. She knew what she had to do next, but the thought of it made her stomach tighten. She hadn't heard from Alex in days, and in those days of silence, she had started to breathe again, to think clearly. But one conversation still hung in the air. Unfinished, a conversation she had avoided, but now felt inevitable. Her phone lay on the bed beside her, the screen dark and lifeless. Maya had deleted Alex's contact multiple times before, but she always found herself typing his name into the search bar, hoping for a message, an apology, some grand gesture that would change everything. But now she knew better. This time, she wasn't waiting for him to reach out. She needed closure, not for him, but for herself. Taking a deep breath, Maya picked up the phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed out the message. It was simple, just a few words, but every letter felt heavy with meaning. "We need to talk." She stared at the message for a long moment before hitting send, her heart pounding as though she had just jumped off a cliff. And in a way, she had. This was her leap into the unknown, into a future without Alex. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The silence was deafening, filling the room with an uneasy tension. Maya tried to distract herself, pacing the small space of her bedroom, her thoughts running in circles. What would she say? How would he respond? Would he even care? Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. She grabbed it quickly, her hands clammy with nerves. His reply was brief as usual. Sure. When? It lacked the warmth or remorse she had once longed for, but it was enough. They would talk. The final conversation she had been avoiding was now in sight. Maya could feel her heartbeat in her throat as she typed her response, agreeing to meet later that evening. Her fingers hovered over the send button. Hesitation washing over her. What if he tried to manipulate her again? What if she fell back into the old patterns, the toxic cycle that had consumed her for so long? But she pushed those fears aside. She was different now. Stronger, clearer in what she needed and deserved. She pressed send, sealing the meeting, and exhaled a long, shaky breath. The day stretched ahead of her, but all she could focus on was the looming conversation with Alex. A part of her dreaded it, but another part, the part that had been growing stronger with each passing day, welcomed it. This was her chance to finally close the chapter and start anew. She spent the day preparing. Not in a physical sense, but emotionally. She thought about everything she wanted to say, every boundary she needed to set. She wouldn't let this be a drawn-out, emotional tug-of-war like it had been so many times before. She was no longer the woman who would bend to his whims, who would put his needs above her own. She had fought too hard for her peace to give it up now. As the evening drew closer, Maya could feel the familiar stirrings of anxiety, but this time, it didn't overwhelm her. She welcomed the nerves, knowing they were a sign that this mattered. It was her final confrontation with the man who had shaped so much of her recent past, but who no longer had a place in her future. And for the first time, she felt ready. This wasn't about winning or losing, or even about getting closure from him. This was about her standing up for herself, about ending something that should have been over long ago. It was about reclaiming her voice, her power, her sense of self-worth. The thought of it brought a sense of calm, like the quiet after a storm. Maya glanced at the time. It was almost time to leave. She grabbed her jacket and stood in front of the mirror. Staring at her reflection, her eyes were clearer, steadier than they had been in months. She looked at herself, really looked, and for the first time in a long time, she felt proud of the woman staring back at her. "You've got this," she whispered to her reflection, her voice firm but soft with compassion. She wasn't doing this for anyone but herself. As she turned to leave, a weight lifted off her shoulders. The conversation with Alex wasn't the end. It was the beginning of her new life, free from the past that had held her down. And no matter what happened in that conversation, she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't lose herself again. The confrontation. The evening air was cool as Maya made her way to the cafe, each step a mixture of trepidation and determination. The familiar streets felt different tonight, like a path she had walked 1,000 times, yet now illuminated with the promise of change. She could hear the distant hum of laughter and conversation as she approached, the sounds of life that seemed to mock her unease. The cafe was bustling, filled with the warm glow of fairy lights and the inviting scent of coffee, but her heart felt heavy with anticipation. Maya arrived early, needing a moment to gather herself. She chose a quiet corner table, its secluded nature giving her a false sense of safety. As she sat, her thoughts spiraled back to the last time they had met, an argument that had spiraled out of control, accusations flying like arrows, both of them wounded in ways they couldn't even articulate. That night had been a turning point, but this meeting felt different. It was her chance to rewrite the narrative. She glanced at the door, each person who walked in sending a jolt of anxiety through her. What if he walked in with that same charming smile, the one that had once melted her defenses? What if he tried to charm her back, to pull her into the familiar dance of blame and regret? But she was ready. No matter how he approached this conversation, she wouldn't let him manipulate her emotions. She was there to reclaim her power, not to get caught in the web of their past. The bell above the door chimed, and her heart skipped as she saw him enter. Alex was just as she remembered. Handsome and charismatic, yet there was something different about him tonight. Maybe it was the way he scanned the room, looking for her, or the slight tension in his shoulders that suggested he wasn't entirely at ease either. She took a deep breath, her palms sweating against the table as she waited for him to approach. "Hey," he said, his voice a mix of warmth and wariness as he slid into the seat opposite her. The air between them crackled with unspoken words. Maya forced herself to meet his gaze, which flickered with a hint of vulnerability, a look she had longed for in the past, but now recognized as merely a tactic. "Thanks for meeting me," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I thought it was time we talked about everything." The word hung in the air, heavy with history and unresolved emotions. Maya could feel her heart pounding, but she was resolved not to falter. Alex nodded, his expression shifting slightly. "Yeah, I guess it's been a while." His casual demeanor felt disingenuous, a veil over the deeper issues they needed to confront. Maya watched him carefully, trying to gauge his intentions, to find the truth beneath his charming facade. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Maya began, her voice unwavering. "About us, about what we went through. And I've come to realize that it's time for me to move on." The words flowed from her with a surprising clarity, cutting through the tension like a knife. She watched as his expression shifted from surprise to something deeper, perhaps regret, or maybe even anger. But it was time for her to own her truth. "Move on?" he echoed, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. "You think you can just walk away after everything we've been through?" His voice was thick with emotion, a mixture of disbelief and something she couldn't quite place. But Maya felt a flicker of strength within her, a fire igniting in her belly as she prepared to stand her ground. "I'm not walking away," she asserted, her voice rising slightly. "I'm choosing to walk towards a life that makes sense for me. For too long, I've been caught up in the chaos of our relationship, lost in your demands and expectations. I've sacrificed too much of myself for this." Each word was a small victory, each declaration a step toward liberation. She could see his defenses rising, but she pressed on, refusing to back down. Alex leaned back, crossing his arms, a familiar defensive posture that made her heart ache but also fueled her resolve. "You don't understand," he said, frustration lacing his words. "I was just trying to help you, to make things better." His tone was accusatory, and in that moment, she saw the man who had often twisted love into control. "Help me or control me?" she challenged, her heart racing. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their shared past. She felt a mix of anger and sadness, the memories rushing back, moments of joy interspersed with pain, laughter overshadowed by tears. But tonight, she would not let nostalgia cloud her judgment. Silence fell between them, a chasm filled with years of unresolved emotions. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, a blend of fear and empowerment. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The chance to confront the past, to address the pain, and to finally free herself from the chains that had bound her for so long. Maya took a deep breath, grounding herself in the present, knowing that whatever happened next was a step toward healing. She was no longer the woman who would allow herself to be swept away by his charm, or coaxed into silence by his guilt. This was her moment, her reclaiming of power, and she wouldn't let it slip away. The turning point and conclusion. The tension in the air was palpable as Maya held her ground, her heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and determination. Alex's expression shifted from disbelief to frustration, and she could see him grappling with the weight of her words. "You really think you can just walk away? After everything we shared?" he shot back, his voice tinged with desperation. But Maya was resolute, the flicker of doubt within her extinguished by a growing sense of self-empowerment. "I'm not denying what we had, Alex. I'm not dismissing the good times or the love we shared," she replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I can't ignore the pain and the control that came with it either. I deserve to be free, to find happiness on my own terms." Each word felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders, a declaration of independence that echoed through her very being. She watched as he processed her words, his facade of confidence cracking just a bit. "I thought we could work it out," he said, his tone softer now, almost pleading. "I thought you were different. I didn't realize how unhappy you were." It was a moment of vulnerability from him, and for a split second, she felt a flicker of sympathy. But she quickly reminded herself of the reasons she was there. This wasn't about him, it was about her. "I've tried to make it work, Alex," she admitted, a hint of sadness creeping into her voice. but I can't keep sacrificing my happiness for the sake of what was. I need to focus on my future, my dreams, things that I've put aside for too long. Her heart ached at the thought of leaving behind the familiarity of their shared memories, but she knew this was a necessary step toward healing. Alex's eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of understanding. "I didn't want to hurt you. I just didn't know how to let go," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya could feel her heart breaking for the boy she once loved, yet she also felt a sense of relief washing over her. It was as if a dam had broken, allowing her to see their relationship clearly for the first time. "And that's okay," she responded gently, her voice filled with compassion. "Letting go is hard, but it's necessary for both of us. I want you to find happiness too, just not with me. We've both got to find our own paths, even if it hurts right now." The words hung in the air, both a farewell and a blessing, marking the end of an era and the beginning of something new. With a heavy heart, Maya reached across the table, placing her hand on his. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Alex. You deserve it, but I hope it's without me." He nodded slowly, and in that moment she could see the acceptance dawning in his eyes. It was a bittersweet farewell, but she felt a sense of closure that she hadn't anticipated. This was her moment of liberation, the first step into a brighter future. As they parted ways, the weight of their shared history lingered, but Maya felt lighter than she had in years. She walked out of the cafe, the cool night air embracing her like a long-lost friend. Each step away from the past was a step closer to rediscovering herself, and she couldn't wait to see what the future held. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of self-discovery and empowerment. If you've ever faced the challenge of letting go of a toxic relationship or reclaiming your happiness, we invite you to share your story in the comments below. Remember, healing is a process, and every step you take is a step toward a brighter future. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories, emotional journeys, and uplifting content. Together, we can support each other in finding our paths to happiness. Until next time, take care and keep shining your light.